So Nicodemus is an elite. He's powerful, educated, knowledgeable, a Pharisee, a leader. He's one of those people that everybody would know, sort of one of the leaders in the middle of the people, and he comes to Jesus at night. And doesn't that sound about right? Because nighttime is when we face real life. Whether it's the buzzing fluorescent lights of the waiting room in those wee hours of the morning, or the crumpled pink slip that's on the hall table and we keep hoping during our sleepless night that by morning it will have disappeared. Whether it's a teenager who's out past curfew and there's not been a phone call, or if it's just making the rounds and putting on the miles of the hospital floor with your IV pole in tow, whatever it is, nighttime is when we encounter real life, when we can't avoid the fact that real life is not always shiny and happy, is it? Nighttime is when we face up to the reality that life is not always the bed of roses that we thought we were promised. Night is when we face the real life that surrounds us. And so it makes sense that Nicodemus would come to Jesus at night. After all, he's learned about him. He's clearly been gathering stories. He's been paying attention. He's been curious. He's been studying. He's been wondering. He's brought all his knowledge to come and see Jesus. And he begins by stating what he knows to be fact, what they figured out. Rabbi, teacher, we know. We figured it out. You must be from God, because that's the only logical explanation. And Nicodemus expects to have a wonderful conversation. The back and forth of ideas and differing opinions, and he expects to be doing a lot of and oh, I see, and oh, I never thought of it that way, and nuh-uh, and all of those things. But instead, what Jesus offers him is, rather than to be argued or to be converted or even to be convinced, but instead to take the world and rotate it just a few degrees. To see things just a little bit differently. Rather than an interchange of ideas and a chance to learn more, Jesus offers a glimpse at the world just a little different. To see real life from a slightly different perspective. My son Conley, a couple weeks ago, went with our congregation's Boy Scout troop on an overnight to a climbing gym in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And they went there to climb that evening, spend the night, and then come home the next day. And because they are Boy Scouts, in preparation for that trip, of course, what they studied was knots. Because that's what Boy Scouts do. They study knots. And so they learned the figure 8 knot, they learned the bowline knot, they learned the square knot just for good measure, and probably some other ones that I can't even pronounce and wouldn't know the name of anyway. They got themselves all tied up in, wait for it, tied up in knots. I'm sorry. Getting ready for this trip. But when Conley got home, he told me something interesting. He said, it was one thing to learn that figure 8 knot when I was in the meeting. He said, it was something else entirely when I put my weight on it. He said, I could learn about climbing and about how to tie these things, and it was quite another thing to swing my legs over the edge and start to rappel. He said, I could learn all the back and forth of how you belay someone and the commands, and it was quite another thing to look down 40 feet and see my friend with the other end of the line and start to put my weight into their care. He said, learning it was one thing. Starting to trust it was something else entirely. And if you notice what Jesus is doing with Nicodemus, is he's offering him the chance to swing his legs over the edge. To let his weight off just a little bit and let Jesus take it. And he says to him that when we sink into and let him have the weight, that we will start to see things just a little differently. And from up there, we might start to see into a different country that's right here in the middle of our own that we didn't even know how to see. It's a nation filled with people with a mark of a cross on their foreheads. Not because of patriotic devotion, but because of the heart that holds them together, of what it is that makes up that land. That it is ruled by a king who is on a cross. And it's a strange place. It's a very strange land because things just go differently there. In that land, it's the poorest and the smallest who are most important. It's a place where lepers and the blind rejoice and are set free. It's a place where widows and orphans and widowers are cherished. It's a place where strangers and foreigners are most welcome. It's a place where we find justice and mercy hand in hand. Peace and forgiveness. Joy and grace. It is a place that is gathered in love. A place, in fact, where it is on the cross that we see that love. A love that spans the world so large, a love so expansive that it even includes those who hate that king, enough to put him on the cross. And it's a love with an embrace big enough for all of us too. Jesus says, from there, you can get a glimpse of this other place. And in there, we see life. So, I invite you today to hear what Jesus is telling you. Listen to the voice of Jesus for you today. Go ahead. Swing your legs out over the edge. Let me take your weight. I've got you, and you're going to be okay. Catch a glimpse of real life, of a place filled with mercy and love. See what joy God has in mind. He says, it's okay. I've got you. You're going to be all right. I've got you.